This is The Sun. Maddie pyjama fibres in suspect's van. Breakthrough, it says there, The Sun. Fibres from Madeleine McCann's patterned pink Eeyore pyjamas are believed to have been found in the prime suspect's VW camper van. Of course, a story that The Sun has taken a great interest in for many years. But, Albie, you have been taking a big interest in two issues, both of it sort of financially issues in the papers. This COVID loans and the fraud and how much money has been lost has been a very big issue. And this extraordinary story that the Metro and the FT are both running with tomorrow. Thousands sent to terror group in Syria, court is told. A former pub landlord, this is the Metro, sent thousands of pounds he borrowed in COVID-19 business bounce-back loans to ISIS fighters in Syria, a judge has been told. And again, that's on the front page of the FT. And we've been hearing, I was hearing earlier this week, we know that the government has said they are trying to crack down on fraud and they've got this new task force of 100 people, but then it turns out that those 100 people have just been sort of borrowed from Peter to pay Paul. They've just been moved around within HMRC or whichever department it does it. So it's not really new blood that's come in, and apparently a lot of those investigators are very junior and perhaps don't know what they're doing as much as more senior people. So it just seems that the government's really, really not on top of this.
I mean, the government is not on top of this at all, in my opinion. I think it's an absolute aberration that a Conservative government, who we are supposed to be in favour of fiscal discipline, fiscal responsibility, would just let £4.9 billion worth of fraud go to criminals in the middle of a cost of living crisis when that money could be spent on the people who are struggling to pay their bills. It could be delivering cuts in VAT to help people with their food and essential goods spending. And I just think I think it's awful that we're just essentially leaving these criminals with our taxpayers' money. And they're going to ISIS, some of our enemies, our most grave enemies in the world. British taxpayers are paying for their bills. The
problem with so many of these cases that I've followed or reported on over the years, whether it's financial fraud or benefit fraud or any sort of financial crime, is that it costs so much normally to try to bring a court case, get a conviction, and then try to get the money back. It's nearly always not worth it when you actually look at how much it costs to do it, because they are so complicated and they take such a lot of expertise. And I think this is one of the problems where you can criticise, and I am very critical of the fact that the fraud happened in the first place, but I think anybody who genuinely thinks we're going to get any of that money back is probably living in cloud cuckoo land.
I don't think I'm living in cloud cuckoo land. Debt collection costs have come down massively since the advent of technology. You know, we don't really have people going around knocking on people's doors anymore. We have emails. We have lots of technologies that can help us recover this money. And I think I take your point about it being very expensive to recover money, but I think to say, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, while the Prime Minister is saying we've done everything we can to help you with your bills, but we're going to leave this £5 billion for criminals to take and say, well, we're not going to make any effort to do this. I think if the Chancellor and the Prime Minister came out and said what you just said, I think we could probably accept that that's not what's been said.
No, but I think they know they can't say what I've just said because it's so unpalatable. It's so difficult to swallow to think that they made such big mistakes in the first place, allowed these criminals to steal all this money, and now, if they were being really honest, I believe they probably haven't got a cat's chance in hell of getting any significant amount of it back, certainly without spending a huge amount of money. So you're throwing good money after bad. So I totally agree, it's a terrible situation. I'm just not sure exactly what can be done about it without spending lots of money. Some people are saying, you know, some of that should go to grassroots football clubs if, and this is quite a big if we can get our hands on that money. And when I say our hands, I mean the government's, because, of course, officially that money is Roman Abramovich. He has been sanctioned, so it would go into a frozen account. Albie, I think you understand how these things work. With the sale, so the football club is up for sale. We've got a preferred bidder. I think we're told that probably the sale will go through by the end of May, by the end of this month. Abramovich's accounts are frozen, so I'm guessing it's quite complicated how we actually get it out. And I think Roman Abramovich would have to agree to whatever it is the government. He has said previously that he would like that money to go to Ukrainians. Other people saying they would like that money to go to grassroots football, where should it go, and how does it work?
Yes, so both Roman Abramovich and the Prime Minister have indicated that they would prefer the £3 billion in proceeds from the sale of Chelsea Football Club to go towards, you know, the victims of Ukraine and the Ukrainian war effort. Whereas we've had David Dean, I think his name is, one of the co-owners of Arsenal Football Club, who is saying that he believes that £750 million of those proceeds should go towards grassroots football. In the United Kingdom it could go towards, I think it's 1,000 fake football pitches, AstroTurf football pitches, 20,000 playing surfaces, and also changing rooms, exactly.
And women's football and all of that, I think.
Precisely, and he speaks about it being important and about being an important part of the government's level up agenda, of course, using that phrase which Boris Johnson likes so much. And I think I tend to agree with David Dean, the co-owner of Arsenal Football Club. You know, today we've announced £300 million in aid going to Ukraine. We have played a leading role on the global stage with leading that Western war effort supporting Ukraine against Russia.
But 300 million, and if there is 3 billion from the sale of Chelsea, and if we're talking about putting 750 million into grassroots, which is football, which is a lot of money, then you're talking about, you know, 2.25-ish billion going to Ukraine. That is properly life-changing money. That really would rebuild, you know, a fair amount of Ukraine. It really would make a big difference. And there is a thing, I do feel, as Boris Johnson said in his speech today, that we let them down. We were asleep at the wheel. They were begging for our help, the Ukrainians, since 2014, and we pretty much looked the other way, whilst coining it in the city, because that was very, very, very useful for the Treasury, getting loads of money in from, you know, us being the favoured home of oligarchs around the world. So I do feel that we owe them something.
Yeah, I think some are making the argument that we owe them something, but of course when we talk about we're not just talking about the United Kingdom, we're talking about the whole of NATO, and Britain could not have acted without the US also backing the way that we acted, because NATO is a military alliance of the Western nations.
But we could have sold them those arms that our defence ministers kept saying we needed to, and everyone else around the cabinet table was going, yeah, tomorrow. But
NATO can't really respond in a meaningful way without US backing, which is my point, and we didn't have that in 2014.
Fair.
And I suppose some people would argue that actually as well we do have something, you know, we do owe something to the people who are suffering in the United Kingdom today as well. And the Prime Minister, in the interview that you mentioned earlier on ITV's breakfast show, said he was doing everything he could for the people of this country, and it quickly unravelled that that wasn't the case. And some might argue that perhaps some of this £3 billion in proceeds from Chelsea Football Club, a British football club, a national treasure to some people, should be spent on the people in the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Well, if you're a Chelsea fan, I would love to know your view. You can give us a ring 0344 499 1000. The spectacles are on because we've got more newspapers in. The Times, privately educated to lose places at Oxbridge. Now, this is a story that's a perennial favourite, isn't it, where we're constantly told that the Oxbridge universities are going to try to take more state school kids and fewer privately educated kids. So this is Vice-Chancellor warns independent schools. Private schools must accept that they will get fewer students into Oxbridge. The Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge has told The Times. Professor Stephen Toop said that leading universities needed to make it very clear to independent schools that their intake would reduce over time and that their premium was likely to be reduced. I'm going to get your view on that in just a minute. But the other story is Robo Chef is here with taste of future. Science may have come to the rescue of cooks who struggle with their seasoning in the shape of a robot chef that can taste food and offer guidance. Not for me, thanks. Energy firms investigated over claims of direct debit rip-off. That was on one of the other ones. Then we've got The Mirror. Windfall tax now. Beyond pathetic is their front page with the BP in green there. BP rakes in £639 a second, says The Mirror, while petrol prices fuel a cost of living catastrophe. Will the PM step in? No, he just admits he could do more, then mutters more rubbish about buses. Albie, I'll get your views on that in just a minute as well. The Eye, Rwanda migrant plan in chaos. We talked a lot about that last night, of course. That's the idea of sending asylum seekers or migrants to Rwanda to be processed, which I think is completely unworkable myself. I'm all in favour of finding something that does work, but don't think that's the one. The Daily Mail, man who just can't answer a straight question. Keir Starmer was left squirming yesterday as he struggled to fend off urgent questions over Beergate. And there's Kim Kardashian in that Marilyn Monroe dress that you heard about in The Talk and in Piers Morgan Uncensored. Independent outcry at court threat to abortion rights across US. We've just been talking about that. And I think I've already done The Guardian. Oh, and finally, con the buses on the Daily Star. Prime Minister told about OAP forced to travel on bus all day just to keep warm, but the shameless buffoon tries to claim credit because he gave out free bus pass. That's again going back to the Good Morning Britain interview this morning. Albie, this privately educated lose places at Oxbridge.
Yes, I think it's an interesting story. Look, my view is that places at Oxbridge, places in Parliament, places in top institutions and organisations in this country should be awarded on the basis of merit. However, when we look at the overrepresentation of people who went to private schools at universities like Oxford compared to the 7% of people who are lucky enough to go to a private school, and I was very lucky to go to a private school myself, at elite institutions like the University of Oxford, where I think where I think some of them are close to 50% going to private schools, there is clearly quite a serious imbalance going on, and that does need to be changed. And I suppose the Times is just stating the obvious. If there are going to be more places going to state school students, of course there are going to be less places going to private school students. It's just
they're not going to double the size of the university.
No.
Lots more coming right up. Interesting, Albie. Pork Chop says, are we being serious? This is about the money from Chelsea and what happens to it, the money that was going to go into a frozen account, but then is it just going to sit there, £3 billion? Pork Chop says, why aren't we talking about the elephant in the room? You are talking about stealing Roman Abramovich's money. This isn't ours to give away. The UK is turning into Zimbabwe. Now, it is a difficult area. What does happen to frozen money belonging to somebody who's been sanctioned, and who does that money belong to? Now, Abramovich has already said that he would give that money to Ukrainians. So, in a way, it's not stealing it. But then there's an issue where he's lent Chelsea Football Club more than £1 billion, so more than a third of that money is a loan. And so are we allowed to take that bit? That money was a loan to Chelsea. So it is very complicated. It's
very complicated. So I think he lent Chelsea Football Club, I think it was £1.54 billion back in 2003. And this is actually something which is holding up the sale process at the moment with the various different financial parties trying to get involved in it. But with that £3 billion figure, and I think what this gentleman, Pork Chop, I think his name was, great Twitter handle, by the way, is trying to get at. It's an interesting point, but I think we have agreed that Russian sanctions are a necessary tool in this instance, as a tool of economic warfare, if you will, rather than putting boots on the ground. You know, it's not just Roman Abramovich. We've seen a number of different oligarchs sanctioned. The SWIFT banking ban has really impacted the Russian financial markets and Russian companies' access to money. So I think it's generally accepted that in times of war there are ways that the state acts that in peacetime wouldn't be acceptable. And I would say that this is probably just a function of that. Okay.